Hello and welcome to this year's Arctic Summer College. This is the very first session, so welcome, you've made it. It's always a challenge to see how many people manage to dial in on the first attempt. So I'm glad to see a lot of you have made it. And I also want to say, of course, we might have some late arrivals during this first session, but don't worry. First of all, it's being recorded, and second, we have a slower start with first some housekeeping and introductions, and of course, during the entire time, feel free to ask questions and make comments. You can do that doing two ways. One is to use the chat function at the bottom of the control panel, and the other is to ask questions in the question box. So I'm very happy that we have a good team together, both on the speaker side and on the participant side for this year's Arctic Summer College. The Arctic Summer College has been around since 2011, and we're very happy to continue that tradition. Every year is a little bit different, but of course builds on the previous years, and with such way we're also building a community both for the speakers but also the attendees. Let me just start with introducing our team here. First of all, it's the Arctic Summer College coordinators here in Washington, D.C. That would be Brendan O'Donnell, and then Max Grünig, that's me, hello. And then from Berlin, not yet on the call, is Arne Riedel, our colleague doing the transatlantic European part of the Arctic Summer College. And you've seen just for a second earlier the initiator of the Arctic Summer College, who will talk to you later, Andrea Kramer, was the founder of the Arctic Summer College. So I'm glad he's on the call as well, as evidenced. And Arne will probably dial in later, and we will then give him the opportunity to say a few words once he's on the call. So with that, you can always reach all three of us by emailing the coordinator at arcticsummercollege.org address. You can send all your requests, comments, questions there. All three of us get all the emails. And if you address it to one individual, then the others will disregard it and it will just be treated by the respective recipient. I think that's it for now on housekeeping. If you experience any problems with the connection, don't worry, you can dial in again using the same link. So there's no problem with that. So if you're being kicked out for whatever reason, you can join back in. And I think Arne Riedel has joined us and is also sharing his webcam. Hello, Arne. Glad you made it. So I already said that you're the great European side of the Arctic Summer College, but maybe you want to say a few words.
Thank you, Max, and apologies for being a little late. I was running out of the ministry, so apologies for my appearance. It's my big pleasure to welcome you all to the Arctic Summer College from the European side of Ecologic Institute. Not quite the Berlin office, but my flat today. But I'll join you next week's from the Ecologic office. Just two sentences about my person. I am working with Ecologic for the last 5.5 years, and I'm a lawyer by trade.
I think you're breaking up, Arne. If you can continue your introduction later. Oh, yeah, now you're back.
All right, apologies. So yeah, I've been mostly working for the German government, but also for the EU Commission on a number of Arctic projects, and have been also coordinating the Institute's Arctic activities for the last 2 years. So it's, again, my pleasure to welcome you all, and looking forward to get in touch much closer in the next weeks to come.
Great. Thank you, Arne. And now that we've introduced ourselves very briefly, I would like to open the round and go with a round of introductions, asking each of our participants to say hello. And Abby, your microphone is open now, so do you want to say hello, just your name, and, well, I already started that, but if you just want to say who you are, please keep it to under a minute, definitely under a minute, so we can still manage to have the whole session in the 2-hour time frame. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Abbey Schmeichel. I am from the U.S. I'm in Pennsylvania right now. I am a recent environmental studies graduate from Alfred University. And the reason why I joined, or I applied for the Arctic Summer College, was just because my future career goals, I'm looking to study Arctic climates and how climate change is affecting that, to just better know our planet, and then I want to take all that information and share it with other people so they can better know what's going on and figure out how to change their lifestyles. So that's why I'm here.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. And now our next one in the line is Bernd. Are you ready?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Bernd Kiels. I'm kind of doing this on the fly. I'm leaving to move to Seattle tomorrow, so I'm participating at a table in a restaurant. So for the last nearly year, I've been doing a project with the Marine Conservation Institute focused on creating a national marine sanctuary around one of the Pribilof Islands of Alaska in the Bering Sea. And I thought this summer program would be a good opportunity to network and find more good research that might help inform the research I've been doing for this project. And also, my mother's family is from Germany, so I was also eager to participate because I appreciate the leadership of the EU in climate and other issues, especially now given what's happening in America. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, Bernd. Now, the next one is Brittany. If you're ready, you can go ahead.
Hi there. My name's Brittany Crowell. I am also in the U.S. I work for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in our Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. And part of my portfolio includes supporting our Arctic research activities with both multilaterally and bilaterally. And so I saw this course as an opportunity to kind of have a broader understanding of Arctic issues beyond just kind of the research purview.
Perfect. Thank you. The next one would be Divya Manrique, or Manrique.
Hi all. Thank you for the organizers. Hi to all the participants. I'm watching you from the north of Italy. I thought I am from the Canary Islands, concretely from Tenerife. And I'm here just carrying out my PhD research on the GRC, and the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and focused on the potentiality of community engagement to deal with socio-environmental complexity mainly in insular and remote regions. And this is my interest in the Arctic is because of this, because I would like to focus too deep inside all these things. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. The next one is Divya. I hope I say that correct. Divya Anandkumar. You can correct me now.
Yeah, you got it right. Hi, I'm Divya. I'm originally from India, but I'm currently based in Pittsburgh, in the U.S. as well. I work as a sustainability fellow at the mayor's office in Pittsburgh. But the reason that I'm here interested in the Arctic region is because 7 years ago, I was chosen as an environmental champion to go to Antarctica with an organization called 2041 Foundation. And I've been working with them over the last 7 years for policy-based issues in Antarctica, and not had the opportunity to kind of do a lot in the Arctic policy space. So I wanted to kind of expand my horizons that way. I recently graduated with a master's in public policy from the University of Pittsburgh, so I did have some research in the Arctic, but I think this would be my first foray, so I'm excited for it.
Excellent, thank you. The next one is Emily Hewitt. I'll unmute you.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much for this opportunity and your time. So my name is Emily, and I'm from Ottawa, Canada, and I study at Carleton University. And I'm here today through connection with Stefan Schott, who will be lecturing in August. And we work together on a fishery project, which focuses on food security and sustainability in Johaven, Nunavut. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I see we have already a question. So Kristy, you're having problems with the microphone, and so we're going to read your introduction to the group. So, well, your name is Kristy, and you're from the University of Lethbridge?
Lethbridge in Canada. Okay.
Sorry. I'm currently a student and an employee of the University of Lethbridge. I'm looking forward to getting to know everyone and learning more in the Arctic Summer College. Excellent. Well, I hope that for the next session your microphone works. It's also good for asking questions, but as you see, it also works even if you're in an either very loud environment or your mic doesn't work. You can submit questions and we'll actually react to that. Okay, let's continue with Erin Hamilton, if you're ready.
Hi, thank you very much. So my name's Erin Hamilton, and I'm from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. I'm actually associated with the same project as Emily mentioned. It's called the Toward a Sustainable Fishery for Nunavummiut project, and in addition to the sustainable fisheries work that's being done, I'm looking at the skin-associated microbiomes of Arctic char and lake whitefish in the lower Northwest Passage, so around Johaven Bay in the Kitikmeot region. And I think it's important to characterize these microbiomes because I can infer functions that these microbiomes can serve and how they may contribute to fish immunity. And I'm really excited to be a part of this. Since my research in the Arctic has sort of sparked an interest in science diplomacy in the Arctic as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. The next one will be Lisa Covino. If you're ready, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa. I'm a student at the St. Paul University in Ottawa, but I'm actually Italian, so I'm calling you from the northern part of Italy. I applied to this program because I'm almost graduating in my master program in conflict studies, and I want to deal with a peculiar ecologic vision about the Arctic in my thesis. Therefore, I really hope this will help me. Thank you, everybody.
Excellent, thank you. And now we have Michael Maurer. You can go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael and I was born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm currently a second-year grad student at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in DC, and I'm here this summer. I'm really interested in this opportunity because my school unfortunately does not have a dedicated Arctic program, and so I'm just really thankful that you all are able to host these great webinar series, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about the economic and human development challenges in the Arctic.
Excellent. Well, glad to have you all on board. And just so you know, there are more participants. Some of them have already told us that they won't be able to join the session today, and some of them may only have found out last minute. This will happen on and off, but I think basically most of you are on the call. I'm glad that you made it. Now just a very quick run through of the program so you know what's coming. Of course, you can find that information on the website. It's only been up since yesterday, so I understand if you haven't seen it yet. So just very briefly, today, of course, you know that, you've seen that in the email, Mia Bennett is talking about transportation infrastructure. And next week, we will have two speakers. One is Emily McKenzie from WWF, speaking about Arctic natural capital analysis to inform investment decisions. And then the second speaker is Niels Andreasen from the Institute of the North, talking about Alaska, Arctic, and sustainable development. July 19th, we have Pamela Lasser and Sonia Bickford talking about environmental impact assessment for the Arctic. On July 26th, we have Alexander Chesakov or Sasha Chesakov from WWF talking about the Arctic needs a long-term vision. On August 2nd, we have Inutek Holm Olsen from the Embassy of Denmark representing Greenland in DC, talking about sustainable Greenland. On August 9th, as mentioned before by some of you, so we have Stefan Schott talking about food security and sustainable fisheries in the Arctic. And then a second speaker will be on the same day, Alexei Tsikarev, talking about indigenous people, because that's also, I don't know the official name, but it's something like Indigenous People Day or World Indigenous People Day, so it's a very good fit. August 16th, we have Renee Hulan talking about the representation or depiction of indigenous people in media and policy. On August 23rd, we have Heather Exner-Pirot talking about the Arctic Council, and the second speaker will be Jocelyn Jo Strack talking about indigenous land use planning, leading self-determination and reconciliation. And August 30th is already our last session. We will have Mike Spraga, the director of the Arctic program at the Wilson Center, giving a last presentation for the Arctic Summer College, and then we'll have a wrap-up session similar to what we have today here at the beginning. So that's the run-through of the programming, and with that, I want to hand over to Brendan, who will talk about the call for abstracts.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the great things wrapping up. You noticed that on August 23rd, Heather Exner-Pirot will be one of our speakers, and she was previously part of the Arctic Summer College and wrote a paper that will be appearing in a forthcoming publication that we've just put together and will be published by Springer this fall. The exciting thing about that is that book will be presented, we hope, at the Arctic Circle Assembly this October, October 13th through the 15th. And the four of us, Andreas, Arna, Max, and I, are all going to be able to attend. And we have the opportunity to invite three of the participants from this year's Arctic Summer College to join us as well. And what we would like to do is use this as an opportunity for you to present your original research in that forum. And so the way we've decided to go about selecting who will join us is to have you produce your own research for this Arctic Summer College that you will then be able to present at the Arctic Circle Assembly. So what we're going to ask all of you to do, those of you who are interested and able to go, I guess I should mention that it's all expenses paid, so you don't have to worry about your flight or your hotel. But we need you to write an abstract of what kind of research you would like to do, what kind of article or publication you would like to produce. And if you could do that within the next 2 weeks, submitting by July 19th to the coordinator at arcticsummercollege.org email address, your idea, your abstract, then we'll use that to make our decisions to choose up to 3 people to join us. We will then work with you over the course of these 2 months to put together, develop the research a little bit, make sure the questions in the thesis are focused and that you're in the best position possible to write a great paper. We'll do some peer review and make sure you're prepared for a real presentation on what can only be called a very important international stage. The Arctic Circle Assembly is a great
conference?
Yeah, it's a conference. I mean, it's a great opportunity to meet people from all over the world who really are the ones making, doing some of the most advanced, progressive research in the Arctic, but also the people who are determining the paths forward in terms of governance and policy. So it's a really great opportunity. We really look forward to inviting you. If you have any questions about the process, about the abstract or your research or the paper, feel free at the end of today's session perhaps to ask some questions. We'll also have next week where you can bring up any issues you're having, but mostly just go ahead and send an email to that coordinator address and one of us will get back to you for sure. But we look forward to seeing some of the abstracts.
Perfect, excellent. Well, that's exciting, and I look forward to these abstracts as well. Now I wanted to hand over to Andrea Kramer, the initiator and I would say founder of the Arctic Summer College. Andreas, the floor is yours. Please.
I've unmuted myself and I assume that you can all hear me. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address this first session of this year's edition of the Arctic Summer College. When we started it, it was really about to make sure that work on various Arctic work streams didn't stop during the summer, during a lull in the project work within the Ecologic Institute, but word got out, and even during the first year we got people working in other institutions being interested and saying that they would like to join. So in the subsequent year we opened it, we established partnerships, we found sponsors, without which it wouldn't be possible to run this sort of thing, and without which it wouldn't be possible to invite some of you, I can say the best of you, the most enthusiastic of you, to attend the Arctic Circle Assembly this year. So I take pride in the fact that I had some role in initiating the Arctic Summer College, which has built a community from year to year. You are a fellow for the first year. Then you have the right to attend, to listen in, and we invite you to stay in touch. But eventually you will find that you meet people again from the Arctic Summer College, not only from your year, from your cohort, but also from the other years, because people come back as sponsors, and then eventually you bump into one another at one of the other, or the other Arctic event around the world. And wherever you are, you know that you're part of a community that is unique in sharing information across scientific disciplines, across the various policy areas, and across the various language areas in the circumpolar north. It's this way of doing things that nobody else does, and doing it in a modern way and with this modern engagement. That is what we're trying to do here. And I want to thank you for your interest in all of this, and I look forward to all of your contributions. I'll be watching more in the background, and you occasionally see my notes in the chat box, if that works again. I take very much away every year in listening to the presentations and learning about what is going on and how things change over time, and learning about who will be the future Arctic professionals that have an accelerated career, in part because they have the exchange with people through the Arctic Summer College and access to information, and a circle of friends to help them along. So thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you, Andreas. That was a great opener, and absolutely right. You mentioned the support of our partners is of course crucial this year again, and I would like to thank publicly our supporting partners, WWF Arctic Program in Canada, and also the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, who's supporting specifically the participation at the Arctic Circle Assembly. So big thanks to both of these organizations, and of course also want to thank all the other partners who are contributing in non-financial ways, including the Arctic Circle Assembly, where we have now the third breakout session in a row, in the third year in a row. Also our other partners, such as the World Policy Institute, where we're usually invited to submit blog posts. So if you want to write something that comes out of the Arctic Summer College or is inspired by it, we can then facilitate the publication there. And also, of course, our other partners, such as partner research institutes in Europe and across the world. So thank you very much, Andreas. And now it's already time to introduce our speaker for today. It's Mia Bennett. You've seen that in the email, but nevertheless, I'll introduce her just for etiquette. Mia, thank you very much for joining us today. Mia is a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow at the University of California in LA. She's also the founder and manager of the Cryopolitics blog, and you have a Master of Philosophy in Polar Studies from the University of Cambridge, where you were a Gates Cambridge Scholar. So that's a lot, and I even shortened it already considerably. Leave it to you to expand further on your knowledge and expertise, specifically regarding the topic of your talk today, which is development on ice, drivers and impacts of Arctic transportation infrastructure, and which is, needless to say, that your research focus area. So thank you very much for being also the very first speaker at this year's Arctic Summer College. It's always tricky to be first, but even more appreciated. Thank you for taking the time and for joining us today. And I look forward to your presentation. Thank you. Mia, we can't hear you. You're still muted. Yeah.
Thank you.
Perfect. I'll try again.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah. Great. Well, sorry about that, and thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to be here today. So it's wonderful to have the chance to speak to all of you at Arctic Summer College, and as I am the first speaker, hopefully we don't have any technical difficulties and hopefully the presentation runs well. But we'll just start off by sharing my screen here. Okay, so hopefully you can see the screen now, and I'll just put this up.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Perfect. Okay. So I'll be speaking about the social and economic impacts of Arctic transportation infrastructure, and this has largely been the focus of my dissertation topic. So I'm finishing up my dissertation now, and I'll kind of run through some of the kind of broader questions and also results that I've gathered in the past couple of years. So I'm going to kind of start off with a kind of big picture view of the Arctic, which is really often, if we're reading the news about the Arctic, it's often focused on climate change. And when we hear about climate change and the dramatic decline in sea ice, for instance, we often kind of hear this language in step with this idea of the opening of a new frontier in the Arctic. And a lot of this really took off around 2007 when the sea ice minimum plummeted to a new low. So with this kind of drastic change in the Arctic's environment, this elicited new narratives about the Arctic as a place that needs saving. So this is an example of a poster from a Greenpeace campaign that talked about the region as a place that needed to be rescued from this drastic environmental catastrophe, so to speak. On the other hand, you have this kind of boom narrative that's associated with the new frontier that's seen to be opening the Arctic. And to illustrate that, you have newspaper headlines such as this, which is "The world has discovered a $1 trillion ocean." And this is an estimate taken from this, I think, the CFO of Guggenheim Investment Partners, which is an investment firm very much interested in building out Arctic infrastructure to the tune of $1 trillion worth in order to potentially access new oil and gas resources, along with developing transportation routes in the region. So maybe this kind of contrast of the Arctic needing saving and stopping all development versus this idea that the Arctic should be developed for the benefit of the whole world, this perhaps is part of the Arctic paradox in a way, which is a concept used to describe how further development in the Arctic could actually very much exacerbate the kind of environmental problems and climate change that the region faces by virtue of increased carbon dioxide emissions, greenhouse gas emissions being released in the north. So to illustrate this Arctic paradox a little bit more and see what both sides of what actors on both sides are saying, so to speak, this is a photograph I took at the Arctic Circle meeting, which was just mentioned a few minutes ago. So this is a conference held every year with a lot of really heavy hitters in Arctic development, so a very exciting place to be. And here you have the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon saying how Arctic melting affects Miami, Mumbai, Shanghai, all these other coastal cities. And when the Arctic suffers, the world feels the pain. On the other hand, you have the former president of Iceland, who really kind of created the Arctic Circle Conference, talking about the Arctic in slightly more colonial terms, saying how the Arctic is like discovering a new Africa. And this brings to mind almost perhaps a colonial rush for all of the resources that could potentially be up for grabs. So you have these two kind of competing discourses in a way. And I think both sides perhaps have something to say. The Arctic perhaps does need to have certain regulations put in place to limit and control development, but there's also, the Arctic very much is not nearly as, I guess, industrialized as the rest of the world. And we can perhaps illustrate this using nightlight imagery, which is something I've done in my own research. So nightlight imagery is really exciting kind of data because it allows us to see from space human presence and human impact on the globe. So wherever you see lights, that's pretty much a sign of a city or a port or some kind of industrial settlement. So if we look at the Arctic here, there's really not too many lights. They're mostly concentrated around the most urbanized part of the Arctic, which is in northern Norway, Sweden, Finland. And then you have oil and gas developments around, say, the Alaskan North Slope, and then in parts of Russia. Oh, there we go. And then if we were to broaden out the picture, we can see kind of the lights starting to fill out on the three continents with Europe, North America, and Asia. And now if we fill out the picture completely, we can start to see all of the other lights in these three markets and really how dark the Arctic is in comparison to these three continents. And from this perspective, it perhaps becomes clearer why states and corporate officials in these three continents might seek to use the Arctic as a shortcut between the three kind of main global markets. So the Northern Sea Route goes through Russian waters largely and would connect Asia to Europe. And the Northwest Passage, which would cut across the top of Canada through the archipelago and around Alaska, that's probably has less potential in a way than the Northern Sea Route just due to the fact that there's less infrastructure along the way. But you can kind of see how these are both, particularly in public imaginings and even in government imaginings, kind of pushed forward as ways to develop the Arctic along these transportation corridors. So kind of following on to this introduction, to frame the rest of the talk, the kind of three research questions I've really been pursuing are: first, what do you know about the history of Arctic development? Second, how is Arctic development unfolding today? And then third, I'll briefly look at what the future may hold for the Arctic. Of course, this part is all kind of in the realm of speculation, but I'm going to try and pick out some major trends that I see as driving development in the North. So to kind of first talk about the kind of history of Arctic development to set the stage, I think this is important because we often think of the Arctic as completely lacking any sort of history of development, and as really being this new frontier, when in fact there are several centuries of natural resource extraction and of course millennia of human habitation. So just to kind of, I'll start the kind of timeline here in the 1600s, which is when we can say arguably that kind of the export-oriented development of Arctic natural resources began. So we can characterize, say, the 1600s through 1900s as a time of a lot of this kind of exploitation by various individuals, companies like the Hudson's Bay Company in Canada, different states, and even empires. And as a few illustrations, we have, say, British whaling off the coast of Greenland. Dutch and Spanish whalers also went up to Svalbard and northern Norway, just to illustrate some examples. So whale oil was a very prized global commodity at the time. In the 1900s, you move towards kind of a more, getting towards more minerals-based extraction in the Arctic, with the Klondike Gold Rush and the Yukon being a case in point. And later on, you'll start to have, of course, actual kind of fossil fuel oil and gas development replacing whale oil extraction in the Arctic. So after the 1900s, we're starting to move towards a period more of modernization projects in the Arctic that are kind of imposed from above by the state, often against the will of indigenous peoples living in the region. And at the same time, the Arctic, particularly in the after World War II and the post-war period, militarization comes to the fore as a type of national project to develop the Arctic. So the Arctic kind of gets developed more by the state for its own vision in this period. Beginning in the 2000s now, particularly due to increasing public recognition of climate change, we can say that sustainable development is kind of really maybe one of the main ways that the Arctic is thought about as being able to be developed. Is development can come, but it can be done in a kind of green, environmentally friendly way that also benefits people living in the Arctic while benefiting the whole globe. So you have, in a way, this kind of paradoxical reconciliation of both conservation and development, of both global and local interests, all of which perhaps can help save the Arctic. So those two competing narratives that I showed at the beginning might actually, in various imaginings and discourses, and perhaps in reality, can be somehow reconciled in order to square the circle. So to just illustrate a little bit more about kind of how the Arctic, in fact, has been developed in the past and connected as well. The Arctic has not always been isolated. This is just an example I like to show from Claudio Porta, Michael Bravo, and others who study the Inuit trails in northern Canada. So these are kind of pan-Inuit trails that connected the Canadian Arctic. So these are really, this map here is based on data that comes out of the 1800s or so. And you can really see that this is very much a networked space. So it's not like people were living in kind of pinpoints on a map. The Inuit were in fact very much using the Northwest Passage area and all sorts of other waters along the Canadian archipelago to look for food and to connect their communities and so on and so forth. So you have on the one hand this network, but on the other hand we can see illustrating those kind of export-oriented voyages stemming or originating in Europe and headed towards places like Svalbard in northern Norway, or later on kind of a northeast Canada in search of cod, actually. So just to illustrate here, we can see kind of how these two different networks came up against each other in the Arctic. So it's not like Europeans were going into kind of no man's land. In fact, they were going to a place that was very much inhabited. So I think anytime we think about development, we also need to think about it not as kind of a linear process that just originates from Europe and spreads out, but as something that very much comes into contact with existing cultures, ways of life, peoples, and economies. And I think one other thing to perhaps shed some light on is how development historically has been framed as kind of extractivist, and how this narrative is in a way changing. So if we look at how development of Alaska in the 1900s was discussed, this is just an excerpt from a newspaper I found which talks about how either Alaska will be opened for development in the right way or it will stay locked. And this is interesting in a way because you can see the kind of continuity of the Guggenheims, who I mentioned earlier with the $1 trillion estimate. They were quite interested in Alaskan development a century ago in order to build a railway there. So you have kind of long-standing players in Arctic development as well. But so this excerpt comes out of a front page of the Seattle Star, which talks about how Alaska development is really about helping Seattle. So this kind of extractivist notion that this whole region was up for grabs for the benefit of cities and economies in the South. Now, I think this contrasts with what we might see in the present, because I'm just going to see if I can, to just draw a contrast here. If we talk about how the Arctic would be framed now, we see much more language of it's going to benefit people living in the Arctic, for instance. Of course, this kind of period, this period of how Arctic development will benefit locals, that is only developed recently, and what we're seeing in, say, the middle of the 20th century, in the post-war period in particular, was this trend of modernization, militarization, and nationalism. So we see here, this is a picture I took in the Sakhalin Republic of Russia. You have a hydropower dam that was built on permafrost in the region, with this mural of Lenin walking proudly astride the hydropower dam. So very much development in the Arctic was done out of kind of this idea to build up and enhance national sovereignty and power. What we're seeing, though, after, say, the Cold War and after this kind of end of militarization in the Arctic, so to speak, is a move away from development being for national sovereignty, and instead development is being both overseen by kind of various global actors along with local actors, and much more a move of kind of, or development of, say, global governance. So you have this idea put forth by Soviet Premier Gorbachev, who says in the end of the 80s, let the north of the globe, the Arctic, become a zone of peace. And then if we kind of trace that out further, more recently, we've had the establishment of the Arctic Economic Council, which is kind of under the auspices of the Arctic Council. And its goal is to establish strong market connections between the Arctic states. So I think this is a very notable transition in a way, moving away from kind of the Arctic as a kind of military zone, and instead of confrontation between states, and instead one where Arctic states are connected based on market connections. So again, you have this increasing industrialization of the region. And this has resulted in all sorts of documents, such as the World Economic Forum's Arctic Investment Protocol, which really seeks to kind of control development in the Arctic and make it somewhat responsible and sustainable, again, to bring back that notion of sustainable development. So just to kind of draw a contrast with what we saw earlier with the idea of how Arctic development was extractivist, now in fact players from outside the Arctic involved in this kind of greater global governance project of the region talk about how they can contribute to the region through its protection, through its development. They're kind of positioning themselves in a very different way than before. So you see here countries like Japan talking about how they can contribute to the Arctic, which is now a global issue, no longer just a regional one. To kind of just briefly look at some of the actors involved in the global governance in the Arctic right now, we can say, of course, that there are Arctic states, as we would imagine in the past, but now we have increasingly various intergovernmental organizations, such as the Arctic Council and Arctic Economic Council. You have subnational governments, environmental organizations, and then the three that I focus mostly in my dissertation research involve indigenous organizations and corporations, other kinds of multinational corporations such as oil companies, which are major players in the Arctic today. And then interestingly, you have the rise of non-Arctic states such as Japan, as you just saw. China, of course, is one that you've probably heard about as kind of increasing its Arctic presence. But for the remainder of the talk, I'm largely going to focus on the role played by a certain indigenous corporation in the Canadian Arctic. And so just to sort of begin to segue more specifically into this idea of transportation in the Arctic and what these transportation projects are all about, just kind of want to kind of draw a little background here and show how transportation in the Arctic has always been seen as a problem in the Arctic, and the lack of transportation infrastructure really as being kind of the thing that's preventing the Arctic from being developed. The region is so far away, so it needs these pipelines and railroads and roads to be put in, and if only the Arctic is connected to the rest of the world, then it may really be developed. So this is just a newspaper from the 1920s, which kind of puts forth this idea. And we see this again in say the Arctic Circle conference, where people from say Icelandic shipping company Eimskip talk about how connecting these markets is really necessary, and not only is it going to lead to the Arctic's development, but it's going to really benefit the people living in the region. So it's going to create opportunities in this kind of vague language that's often promoted. So to more carefully kind of unpack this question of whether transportation development will benefit people in the Arctic, and if so, who and how, I kind of want to ask how is Arctic development unfolding today? So if we take again this kind of broader overview using Nightlight Imagery, we can see the places in red are those that are that have increased in brightness between the early 90s and 2011, and places in blue are those that have declined. So actually across a lot of Russia, you can see following the disintegration of the Soviet Union, there's been a fair amount of kind of decline in lights, which often suggests economic contraction and depopulation. Areas in red are those where cities may have grown, there's more industrial development, and we see those more characterizing, say, northern Norway, and then in parts of Alaska, and a little bit in Canada. Let's see, I'm just going to skip over this slide in the interest of time. Let's go into this one. Okay, so just to specifically more focus on the kind of transportation infrastructure side of this, of where development's been occurring in the Arctic, one problem that has come about as climate change has accelerated is the issue of ice roads. So in much of the Arctic, and particularly in Canada and Russia, where the distances are quite vast, ice roads are a very important means of providing transportation for communities and industrial settlements that otherwise wouldn't have any permanent overland connections. So in winter, when a river freezes, trucks and vehicles can go out and drive on these frozen rivers in order to reach these disconnected sites. So this is just a picture of an ice road here in the city of Yakutsk in Russia, and they put up signs and everything. So it's actually quite safe and regulated to drive on. But as climate change proceeds, the kind of seasons for ice roads are shortening, and this has led in part to discussion as to whether ice roads should be replaced by permanent all-weather roads that are built on top of the tundra in order to allow for year-round access. Because as ice road seasons shorten, and if, say, a community can't get all of its goods trucked in the requisite amount of time, they have to fly things in, which costs an inordinate amount of money. So geographer Neil Adler talks about how climate adaptation is done to both moderate climate change impacts, but also to take advantage of new opportunities. So in a way, we can think of the possibility of new roads being built in the Arctic as a way to kind of at the same time not only cope with climate change, but also advance industrial development in the region. So the two kind of ice road replacement projects I've studied in the Arctic are in the Northwest Territories in Canada, where a new highway is being built from the kind of capital of Canada's Western Arctic, Inuvik, to Tatiatic, which is a small and largely indigenous hamlet on the Arctic Ocean. And the other project is in Yakutsk, which is the capital of the Sakha Republic in Russia. And this is a city of 300,000 people that lacks any kind of overland connection to the outside world. So I've carried out various interviews, conversations, held focus groups in each place in order to try and ascertain local views as to why these ice roads may or may not be replaced, what kind of new projects are coming in, and who they will benefit. So for the remainder of this talk, I'm just going to focus on the case of the Northwest Territories in Canada of this highway called the Inuvik-Tatak Highway, the ITH. So the ITH will be the first public highway in North America to reach the Arctic Ocean. You may have heard of the Dalton Highway in Alaska, but that stops just a little bit before the coastline because you have all of the kind of fenced-off oil and gas development in Prudhoe Bay there. But once this highway in Canada is finished, you'll be able to drive all the way up to Tuk, which sits there on the coastline. So interestingly, this highway is almost completely within the Inuvialuit settlement region, which is the kind of land claim that was agreed with the Inuvialuit, who are the indigenous people of this part of the Canadian Arctic. So this will really be the northernmost extension of the North American road network, which we see here. And in orange, you can see where the ice roads are. So this is probably the northernmost ice road in Canada, but at the same time, even though it's very far north, it's not actually necessarily the one most vulnerable to climate change. So if we look at a land surface temperature anomaly map from last winter, we can see that this is the time of year when ice roads should really be freezing up. And actually the temperature, it looks like the anomaly map is kind of white around Inuvik and Tuk, so that means perhaps the weather was proceeding as it should at that time of year. But other kind of ice roads further down near Saskatchewan were actually much more at risk of not freezing up for the winter. So it's not only environmental factors that are driving Arctic development and road development in particular, but there are always political and economic considerations as well. So if we kind of put those in perspective with the road's construction, we can see how the ITH is actually going to be the extension of the Dempster Highway, which was a project, a road project carried out in Canada in the 70s as part of this bigger Roads to Resources program, which sought to build a number of roads in the Canadian Arctic in order to access oil and gas and minerals. So again, kind of furthering this extractivist view of Arctic resources. And so you can see that there are, in fact, in brown, those are the oil resources that lie offshore in the very oil-rich Beaufort Sea, which in fact has a lot more oil, as you can see, than around Prudhoe Bay in Alaska. At the same time, this road will quite handily lead to perhaps the construction of a port along the Northwest Passage, which runs right nearby. So there's a lot of political and economic potential in a way surrounding the road's construction, which might make it perhaps in the first place more attractive to the government to finance than, say, an ice road that doesn't really lead to anywhere politically or economically strategic in Saskatchewan or Manitoba. So this is just a photo of the road's construction earlier this winter. So I went up to see the final season of construction, and it's a 120-kilometer road that will cost 300 million Canadian to construct, and it's taken about 5 years, and it was funded I think in 2011, 2013, not too long ago, by Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who was very much concentrated on this idea of use it or lose it in the Arctic. So we need to build development in order to show that we own the Arctic. We need to further development in order to show that we own the Arctic, in kind of his perspective. And you can see kind of the vast distances and very harsh landscapes with which the kind of construction workers, who are, for the most part, I would say at least over half of them are Inuvialuit, are contending with. So this is just a picture of the frozen Arctic Ocean. And that's a truck, just that little rectangle there you see on the horizon, that's traveling the ice road, which just finished its last season this past winter. Just to zoom in, you can definitely see that's a truck there. And so it's a really quite beautiful experience in a way to drive on the ice road, and a lot of locals kind of relish this experience, and they note how the ice changes color over the winter, and they just really enjoy going out there kind of and being on the ice, so to speak. So it has a lot of local importance as well. The ice road's been maintained by the municipality for the past, say, 30-odd years at least, I think. But once this ice road, once the permanent highway is completed, the ice road will no longer be maintained, and instead you'll have kind of this new 24/7 road that you could drive from Inuvik to Tuk to the Arctic Ocean. So the state has a very clear vision of what it sees with this kind of new highway being built. So this is just a view of the highway from space here, and we have Prime Minister Stephen Harper and kind of various documents associated with his administration talking about how the road will complete Canada's road network, and it will strengthen Canada's Arctic presence and contribute to economic and social development in the North. So again, this idea of industrial development leading to broader kind of human development and improvement in quality of life. At the same time, though, this road is very much going to lead to all these oil and gas leases. So one has to wonder whether there are any ulterior motives in building this highway, so to speak. Whether the state really is that concerned with the 800 people who live in Tuk, or whether it really just wants to access all those oil and gas resources. So this was kind of the idea that I went into my research with, that the state was kind of just building this road in order so that it could access more resources. And this was kind of confirmed over in some interviews by local Inuvialuit and also Gwich'in people who told me that the government does what the government does. It pushes its way anywhere it wants to. So it's kind of a view of the government as coming on from above and imposing its vision on the people of the Arctic. But this individual also told me that it's the people with money who are the people that do something because money talks. So I thought that maybe instead of just kind of assuming the government was imposing its vision on the Arctic, I should perhaps try to more closely follow where the money came from and who it was actually going to. So we have $300 million that were awarded by the government to fund this highway, but that sum of money essentially went to two Inuvialuit-owned construction companies who were contracted to build this highway. So I spoke to various representatives of these two companies driving along the highways, looking at the land, and one person told me that, well, basically what happened was Inuvik and Tuk rallied and went after the federal government. So people in these two towns really wanted the road to connect their two communities for over 30 years. They also just wanted some work because there isn't a huge economy up there. Even though there's oil and gas potential, not much has come of it in recent years. So people who kind of were indigenous and local elites, they started calling it the road to resources, and they said that there's so much tuck to it. So even though they know that these resources offshore are still going to be very difficult to develop and not very lucrative, there was a lot of attraction to the Harper government to kind of frame the road in this way. It's not really as a local community project, but as something that would lead to something bigger for the Canadian state and nation. So just another individual associated with the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation, which kind of is the indigenous corporation associated with the Inuvialuit in the area, says that he noted that how they talked about the road to the north and how it could be similar to the railway for the west. So really for this, it's quite a short road, but they had much bigger visions surrounding it that they kind of were able to convince the government of in order to win $300 million to build what's essentially a local road. So for many people in these two towns, they still rely on, say, whaling to provide a lot of their subsistence, but they're also very much interested in bringing down the price of groceries because at the same time, when they go to the grocery store to supplement their country food, you have things like cereal costing $10 or a gallon of milk costing $10. And if you really want to satisfy that Cheese Whiz craving, that's going to cost about $20. So there's really an idea of local needs that need to be met by this road in the way of lower grocery prices, lower fuel prices, rather than, say, trying to set off a whole new wave of oil and gas development. I think that's something people hope for, but in terms of what their short-term actual kind of needs are, it's for really like day-to-day things for the price of that to go down. And at the same time, the road, its construction in particular, provided very much needed jobs. So different people told me things like, well, if it weren't for the road, there'd be a lot of desperate people. So the project gave people, wage work jobs for a good 5 years. And that's another person kind of echoed this view by saying, in conversation I overheard, where one person was saying, well, the road's going to ruin the land for hunting and fishing and all sorts of subsistence activities. But another person just responded, well, I don't care. It fed my family for 5 years. So you can even see internally people have these conflicts about, environmental destruction and irreparable damage to the tundra, but at the same time, not being able to live solely off the land anymore and needing this type of income and work. So these are just kind of a lot of the competing, I think, issues that go into Arctic development, particularly in lands that are still used by Indigenous peoples, and particularly when they're owned by Indigenous peoples now, as you have with the Inuvialuit, they're able to control development. But just because Indigenous peoples control the land, I think that doesn't necessarily mean that the Arctic will be conserved. You could still have, as you see here, sort of industrial development. It's only now that the benefits are accruing perhaps more locally rather than to a place like Ottawa. And there are, of course, people who are completely opposed to the highway's construction. A number of hunters and gatherers I spoke to, hunters I spoke to were quite upset about the way the road was kind of railroaded, so to speak, across the land without much consultation, they argue. So just to move towards the end now, thinking about what comes next with Arctic development and specifically say with this road, you have this idea of what will the highway lead to. So now the highway's pretty much ready to be opened. There isn't too much more work in construction. So now Inuvic's kind of looking to, and Tuck as well, are looking to what can be the next economy. So they know that oil and gas development is still very far off, in part because that's really set by broader kind of global commodity cycles and not so much whether they have a road or not to the offshore oil and gas reserves. So they're hoping maybe that they could build a deep sea port in Tuktoyaktuk. And this might be able to link up with the Northwest Passage if that really takes off. But on the other hand, some people have talked about this highway as becoming the world's longest boat launch. And that's because Tuktoyaktuk is slowly, or actually quite quickly, eroding into the sea as coastal erosion increases due to climate change and increasing storm surge and things like that. So you have this kind of worry that the road might not lead to anything much at all, or that it could lead to something really big. But even if it leads to something really big, like the Northwest Passage and a deep sea port, there's still this tension of kind of short-term development being created in these kind of boom and bust cycles, but then the idea that these might in fact exacerbate the dependence of small Arctic communities that don't have hugely viable local economies, that they could become increasingly dependent on kind of these global cycles of shipping or of oil and gas. So this is something certainly that communities and governments from the local to national scales really need to weigh as to how do we foster truly sustainable economies in the Arctic. And just to kind of highlight past problems with industrial development in the Arctic. So this is just offshore the coast of Tuktoyaktuk. You have an oil rig that's floating from aborted exploration efforts in the 80s, and it's just been floating there for 20, 30 years, and it's kind of a very post-apocalyptic kind of scene in a way, but who's to say that this won't happen with the road, that it will be, say, perhaps poorly maintained, and that it could just end up being a kind of eyesore on the landscape that isn't of much use. I don't think that will necessarily happen with the road, but it's certainly a worry of what can come of industrial development when it's kind of done in a hasty way. And of course, you have this issue of climate change. So as I mentioned, this could be the world's longest boat launch, and you can see how low-lying Tuktoyaktuk is here, just on the Beaufort Sea. That road may not really lead to much at all in, say, 30, 40, 50 years. So in terms of what lessons we can extrapolate from this Arctic highway for broader Arctic development, we can see here that local development needs are more likely to be met if they satisfy national or global imperatives. So we saw the way in which kind of local elites and corporations reframed their local needs of a road, of jobs, things like that, lower groceries. They reframed it in a way of how the road would actually benefit Canada's Arctic identity and Arctic kind of economic pursuits. So they were able to win the funding for the project. For its part, the state kind of promotes the highways fostering long-term development for people living in the Arctic. But I think locals are more skeptical and understand that there needs to be kind of constant projects in the region for kind of industrial development to really take off, rather than just the highway is suddenly leading to all sorts of things. And then I think it's important to just kind of underscore how, while I think it's extremely important for Indigenous peoples to be granted rights to their land, and also to be awarded, say, in various instances, transfers of capital from the government, the creation of these corporations and the establishment of these land rights doesn't necessarily lead to conservation in the Arctic. So I think to try and kind of break apart that relationship in a way and just critique it a little more and understand how actually Indigenous land rights can, in fact, in some cases, support the expansion of industrial development in the Arctic and beyond. So if we just rethink the future of Arctic development, we can see how conventionally we've thought about Arctic development as being imposed from above, as being really environmentally determined and kind of based on, now that the Arctic's opening up, now there will be all sorts of development. And then this idea of how development and developing the Arctic and saving the region are kind of at odds. But in fact, if we kind of look at the Arctic development along some alternative lines, we can see how it's actually locally negotiated and often locally kind of promoted by various Indigenous and local people. It's in fact socially produced, so this highway isn't just coming about because of climate change, say, but there are other kind of interests at work and forces at work from politics to economics to kind of geostrategy. And we can also see how development can be posited as something that's going to help save the Arctic by allowing the kind of continuation of local cultures and also somehow saving the environment as well by doing development in a careful way. Of course, this remains to be seen whether it's kind of going to be long-lasting, if sustainable development is in fact sustainable. But I think these are perhaps ways we can begin to rethink the future of Arctic development along these lines rather than kind of previous views of how it's been done. So I think I'll just wrap it up there, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. That was really, really great. And I think we all learned something new, even though we had maybe previous knowledge about, of course, warming of the Arctic, sea level rise. But this in-depth view of transport development, infrastructure development, and particularly also how this actually affects local populations, indigenous people, and their traditional practices such as hunting, but also, of course, socioeconomic impacts, both on the positive and on the negative. I think you showed that very, very nicely. I think interesting fact, you mentioned Guggenheim in this context-wise, and I just remembered that we praised the Arctic Circle Assembly, and Guggenheim Philanthropies is one of the founding sponsors. So they're also involved there again, and it shows you that there's really this continuity in who is involved or who has an interest in the Arctic and who is supporting the discussion, at least. And of course, philanthropies has a different view than the investor side. Mm-hmm. Great. I think it was also really interesting to see how you showed, okay, there's currently development, but we don't really know how long this will be usable in the future. Just since I'm moderating, I can maybe ask a question first, and we do have already a few questions on the docket here, which I'll bring up in a second. But one question first that links also to some of the later sessions. Do you know, and I don't know what the requirements are for this, legal requirements, but has there been an environmental impact assessment of the road project? And has there been any consequences of that impact assessment?
Yeah, that's a really important question for any sort of industrial development in the Arctic. And I know for the highway there was an environmental impact assessment that was done. Depending on who you ask, that assessment was either done well or poorly. So a number of people I spoke to said it was in fact really rushed through. They never took any kind of baseline assessments. So even though they're studying, say, how the fish are able to still pass over the road through different kind of streams and bridges they've created, since there was no baseline assessment reportedly done, they don't really know if there were way more fish in the past that were going to be able to cross. So I think there's lots of concerns that, you know, even though in much of the Arctic now environmental impact assessments are required, that they're not always done as they should be. So I think that's something to pay further attention to.
Yes, excellent. Thank you for answering this right away. And I wanted to open the conversation now to all the participants, and I hope your questions are still valid. I think we had a very first question coming in from Bernd. Do you want to ask the question directly, or do you want me to read it, or is it already answered? You're unmuted. But if you cannot ask your question, I can, of course, read the question. Just a second, give me a moment. So he's curious to learn more about Arctic coastal transportation systems. Given Alaska's lengthy coastline and the challenging weather conditions that predominate much of the year. I wish to better understand coastal transportation networks with a specific focus on the Bering Sea and Pribilov Island area. So if you cannot answer, that's fine too. Just say that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think I can really, I don't have a good answer for that, but I can probably just say that, you know, even though, so in the Arctic, when we think of the winter time, oftentimes people have this idea that that's when transportation is like the scariest and the harshest conditions. And this may be true for industrial transportation. So obviously ships can't go sail through much of the Arctic and say the Bering Sea when you have, when it's all frozen over. But for many indigenous peoples living in the region, the winter time is actually when it's easiest to move about because you can go kind of across land on solid ground, essentially, when rivers all freeze up. So it's maybe a little bit of a flip in terms of how we think about challenges to transportation, depending on what mode of movement we're talking about. But yeah, as for the Pribilov Islands, I don't know too much about it, and I think with the Bering Sea, maybe you heard about, I think it was a few years ago that Nome, Alaska ran out of, I think it was like fuel for local heating or something, and Nome doesn't have any roads to the outside world, and it was too iced over already in the Bering Sea. So I think the Russians provided an icebreaker that allowed, that cut through the water so that a U.S., I think it was a U.S. Coast Guard ship could come in and deliver the necessary fuel. So in some cases you have kind of emergencies along various Arctic Alaskan communities that can only really be met by, say, icebreaker transportation when you're talking about industrial things that need to come in.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you. I think that was a response, a good response. Thank you. David, if you want to ask your question, I have unmuted you now. You can ask it directly.
Well, hi, Mia. I just asked that if there have been, or do you know cases of displacement or relocation decisions or processes of indigenous communities when these infrastructures projects are implemented or developed or whatever? Do you know concrete cases or?
Sorry, there's just a garbage truck outside my house.
Did you hear me?
Yeah, I heard your question. Hopefully you can still hear me. Yeah, that's a great question. So about whether indigenous peoples have been forcibly relocated as a result of industrial development. I think there are many cases in the Arctic. Perhaps some of the most famous ones often concern hydropower development because it takes up such a vast amount of land and water to build dams. So you have the case, I think in northern Quebec in the 70s, there was the James Bay hydropower plant, I think it was called. And then in Norway, you also had the Alta Dam controversy. So with indigenous peoples, it's often not a case of, say, like if you were to compare it to Three Gorges Dam in China, so hundreds of thousands of people have to leave their home. So because indigenous peoples are often, or at least in recent decades, were more nomadic, it's not necessarily like their house is being relocated, but lands that they might have used for pasture or for hunting, those are being completely destroyed. And so that's kind of more the issue there, is that an incursion on indigenous land by industry is often extremely devastating in a way that's different, say, from how we might think of relocation of people in more kind of settled communities. Specifically to this highway, there were, like, nobody had to move as far as I know because just going through the tundra. But one actually kind of interesting thing, maybe on the flip side, is that the highway will make it much easier for people to reach cabins they would have had in the area. So they would have normally gone there by skidoo or ATV in the summer, say. So it's quite difficult to reach the cabins. So they liked the fact that it was kind of isolated and hard to reach. But now that it's so much easier, they're worried that everyone's going to go out there and build cabins and overfish the rivers and things like that. So there's kind of two sides of access and development coming in, I think.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you. And yeah, we could hear you pretty well, even though
I think it went away now. So
background noise worked really well. Great. I think now we do have a question by Andreas. If you're ready, you can ask your question now.
I don't actually have a question. I did make a comment about the use of the chat boxes, which is more a sort of a process issue. But let me, because I've been called up anyway, thank you, Mia, for your excellent presentation. It's not the first time that I heard something about transport in the Arctic, but it really came together very well in sort of looking at the various options, at the challenges there. So thank you very much. It was fun to listen to and to watch.
Thanks.
Excellent. Then we can go to our next question from Lisa, actually. So let me unmute you, and you can ask your question directly now.
Thank you. While I was hearing your presentation, first of all, thank you. It was a great presentation, and it was very informative. But at the same time, I was thinking about the perspective you used in your presentation, and you focused mainly, as you said you would have done, about indigenous people. So what I was thinking about, and especially in the second part, we talk about developing the Arctic, can we plan an Arctic development considering the ecological perspective? I mean, isn't that in the state interest that the Arctic remains sort of safe?
Well, I mean, this is such a difficult question, because I guess for many states and different interest groups, they would want the Arctic to remain kind of ecologically fully intact and free from any kind of development, which would be beneficial for the environment and to prevent, say, or to perhaps rein in further climate change. But on the other hand, what the state has done in many instances, say following colonization, indigenous peoples were essentially forced into kind of the wage economy and industrial economy. So if you're to now tell people living there that you can't have any kind of development and you need to, say, just be hunting and gathering, that's not really sustainable anymore. So then I don't know what options do they have. If there isn't going to be any kind of industry, there isn't really much else to do for people who have essentially been forced into living in settled areas. So it's an extremely complex issue, and I can see personally both sides of wanting there to be conservation of this beautiful area of the world, kind of for greater human benefit and the greater good. But on the other hand, on the local scale, it's very difficult to tell people that your land is going to be preserved now and it's now a national park, say. And so then they would just sit around all day. So there's a lot of competing issues, and I don't think there's one right answer.
Thank you. Thank you for answering this question. And I think we have a question by our colleague Arne. If you're ready to ask it now, please go ahead. Yeah. No, we can't hear you yet.
Of course, now we go. Thank you so much, Mia, for your excellent presentation. I enjoyed it very much and learned a lot as well. I was actually having two notions of a question. First of all, you mentioned that the people that you interviewed about the ice road were sort of split in the ways, at least it fed my family for 5 years, but at the end, it's destroying my land. Was there some sort of
Arne, we could not hear you. Can you
just yes? Okay, I hope it works now. My question was there sort of a majority within the community that you interviewed, just from your feeling or the interviews that you had towards one way or the other, pro-development or against it? Was there such a thing?
Yeah, so I would say for the most part, Inuvialuit people living in Inuvik were extremely in favor of the highway. They're really excited for this development and to be able to go back and forth between the communities, particularly for people from Tuktoyaktuk, which doesn't have so many local services and resources. they hope to be able to go to Inuvik for cheaper groceries there, and then use like the swimming pool and the library and just kind of these simple things. The one kind of surprising thing to me was that the kind of people who are most opposed to the road were often like white people living in Inuvik, Kentucky, more often employed by the government, who kind of felt that the road's going to destroy the environment and that this road is not really necessary because they have an ice road in the winter. So there was kind of an interesting kind of ethnic split, I guess, that people of largely indigenous descent, I would say, for the most part, favored the road unless they were had very strong identities as hunters.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just a follow-up question on the because you mentioned there's going to be a highway being built right now that's still in progress or that's coming up. Or did I understand that wrong? So my question was basically because you mentioned the impacts of climate change and regarding transportation in the north, it's been mentioned all over again, permafrost thawing in the north, actually posing quite a risk for such a project. Do they have new technologies in place to counter these changes, or how do they cope with that? Or is it just not a locally issue because they don't have permafrost?
There's a ton of permafrost underlying this whole region of northern Canada for sure, and they've had to build the road. So they did build it in a special way where they don't cut the tundra at all because I think that's not really allowed. And it would just destroy the permafrost in a way and disturb it. So they pile up gravel on the road, so the road actually sits several meters above the permafrost bed, the active layer. I think I spoke to some of the engineers involved in designing the highway, and they said that they kind of basically looked at climate models going 30, 40 years out, and that's about it. And that's kind of normally what you would do for, I suppose, any major infrastructure projects, is think about it in a 30, 40-year lifespan. But that is kind of worrisome at the same time if, the projections for 2100 are so perhaps devastating in a way. Is it really smart to build this highway? But if you think about it in only 30, 40 years, the road should probably last until then, I suppose. But we'll see.
Thank you very much. And one last notion, maybe just about the source of the funding. You mentioned it's all state funded. Is there any incentive as of yet? You've mentioned the opportunities and the national priorities and long-term development opportunities. But is there, as of now, at least in this part of Canada, any private investment taking place in infrastructure of this kind and scale? Thank you.
To be honest, I don't think there's too much on the horizon. So, yeah, of the roads funding, 2/3 comes from the federal government, 1/3 from the territorial government, and this highway's almost done. But after that, I don't think there's much corporate interest in building out or developing oil and gas offshore. There was a little more interest in the early 2000s when commodities went back up, but actually even between last summer and this winter, the one remaining oil and gas office, I forget if it was Shell or another company, but they were in Inuvik and then they closed their office. So there's really not too much being done privately. But the other exciting thing for Inuvik is the state is funding a fiber optic line that will open, it might already be done, but it's essentially going to allow kind of development of satellite receiving technologies in Inuvik and perhaps maybe a small space industry in a way. So there's a lot of state-funded projects that could spur private investment, but I don't know how much of it is really being generated as of yet.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you, Mia. And that's an interesting point because obviously digital infrastructure is becoming more and more important. I don't want to say it's replacing because you still need food, and you showed the food prices, right? So it's not that you can just swap and just say, well, you have fiber optics cables, so don't worry. Yeah. But it's definitely opening up new economic opportunities. That's very interesting. Mm-hmm. And we've had a lot of discussions last year about the lack of access to high-speed internet, which is already an issue for something like our program because it's difficult for people to dial in using video and not paying exorbitant charges for it. So this is a real challenge. So I'm glad to hear that as well. We have more questions from the participants, and I want to ask Brittany if you want to ask your question now. You're unmuted.
Great, thanks, Mia. Very interesting presentation. I have a question. Alaska has a dividend program, the Alaska Permanent Fund, which uses oil and gas revenues to then pay out a dividend to citizens. I was wondering if you think that there's an opportunity for similar dividend models to be used to maybe as like an adaptation dividend fund to help communities to be able to capitalize on short-term economic opportunities while still being able to kind of think longer term about potential changes and the need to adapt. Maybe with more limited private investment at this point in time, that's not as viable an option. But I was wondering if maybe that's a model that could kind of help to better balance this short-term, long-term dichotomy.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I haven't really heard or learned too much about adaptation funds, and I don't know entirely how they would work or where the sources of funding would come. But I think like this Alaska dividend model has been kind of a model for a lot of both resource development in different parts of the world, and then if you look at how various indigenous groups in Canada and Alaska manage their own funds. So a lot of times when land claims were settled, they received an initial transfer of, say, I don't know, with the Inuvialu, they received about $45 million from the Canadian government, and then they established a corporation to invest those funds, and then they pay out dividends to shareholders every year. So a lot of indigenous groups follow this kind of model of investing money for long-term kind of intergenerational, or I guess intergenerational sustainability, but to specifically have an adaptation fund, I think that would be quite exciting, but it would just be a question of where the initial money would come from if it's not coming from private resource development or something like that.
Thank you. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Mia, for that interesting connecting it to the adaptation funding or the adaptation fund. We have a new question from Michael. I'm going to unmute you in a second, and if you're ready to go, please ask your question.
Yeah, thank you, Mia, and also I really enjoy your blog. Thank you for providing that service. My question is on how the construction of the highway changed the attitudes, or if it didn't, of other villages in Canada's Arctic, and were they asking for equal development of transportation networks? And I also have an additional question. I wanted to ask you if the attitudes in that community changed with respect towards tourism. Do they think there are tourism opportunities now that anyone with access to a road system can get to their community? Thank you.
Yeah, so with the first one, not having traveled to any other communities in the Canadian Arctic, I can't really speak to how this highway might have changed their views, but just anecdotally, one person working on this highway was from a neighboring community of Aklavik. And people that I was talking to at the time, they were joking that once the ITH is finished, now the next road will go to Aklavik. And he was saying how he doesn't want this road at all because it would mess up the land right around his community, and he prefers to be able to go and build a highway to a different community and make money off of it, but still have his local land preserved. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So there might still be resistance to highways in other communities, even though they see the benefits that come from improved access. Specifically, tourism is maybe one benefit that people see is coming from a road. So there's a lot of hope in Tuk that even though a lot of people are skeptical basically that the highway is going to lead to more resource development, but I think there is a real hope that tourists will start to come up from the US and Canada along this highway. But then at the same time, to be honest, looking at the tourism figures along the Dempster Highway, which terminates in Inuvik right now, those have dropped almost by 50% between 2000 and 2015. I think partly because people just aren't doing like big RV trips anymore, and they're going for like much cheaper vacations to Iceland, say, if they want to get that kind of Arctic experience. So even though little like hotels and cafes are slowly opening up in Tuk and Inuvik as a result of the highway, I don't know how viable tourism really will be as a future industry, unfortunately.
Thank you.
It's so far to drive, it takes forever. So.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting aspect, because of course we're always recommending diversification of the economy, and so different revenue streams, not just natural resource extraction, and not just using also government funds as the other revenue stream, but tourism is very often something people look at. But it's interesting how you show how it actually declined, because also, of course, there's other opportunities that might be cheaper, that can substitute or provide similar experiences for much less effort and less money. And that's, of course, important to recognize, because very often when public officials or policymakers are planning these development strategies, everything is only growth oriented. So it's only getting better in the future, but important to see it's not always growing consistently. Things can also decrease.
Just from a human interest perspective, how long is the drive? When you went up there, how long did it take you? How did you travel there to talk?
I flew there when I went last summer, and the flying isn't so bad. You can fly from like LA to Calgary, I think, to Yellowknife to Edmonton. No, sorry, from Calgary to Yellowknife and then to Inuvik, and that takes about, I don't know, 12 or 14 hours, but it costs over $1,000 one way. Now, if I were to drive, let's say you were to drive from Vancouver, Vancouver to Whitehorse is about, don't know, maybe that's like 12 or 14 hours, but then from Whitehorse, that's another at least maybe 12 or 14 hours to Inuvik, and then it's another 2 hours to Tuk. So it's about 24 hours of driving, and that's if you had no problem. So like, we went down the dumpster highway for 1 weekend, and then we came back. There's a couple of river crossings, and you go on a little ferry that's pulled by a cable. But because the water levels were too high, we had to wait 26 hours to cross this like couple 100-meter river, and so that can really throw a wrench in people's travel plans. Later in the summer, it was closed for 5 days, so tourists were stuck there with absolutely no services, no porta potty. I mean, there's nothing up there in terms of tourist services. So I think there's a long way to go for it to become, say, like even something like Alaska. I think it's very remote.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for giving a little bit of perspective on how long this actually takes. We have another question from Lisa. I'll unmute you, and you can ask your question now.
Thank you. Sorry, but while hearing the other people comments and questions, and very good questions actually, I just remember about last year's signature of the Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Obama agreement. It's a joint US-Canada joint statement about climate, energy, and Arctic leadership. So in this agreement, of course, we said that there won't be any more this massive energy and fossil fuel extraction in the Arctic. Do you think this will influence effectively the development and also infrastructure development of the Arctic in some ways, especially considering today's situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in the case of the U.S., how long that moratorium lasts is, of course, now very much up for debate, given Trump's stated opposition to it and his attempt to overturn it. So in Alaska, you could see something different. In Canada, I think the moratorium lasts for maybe 5 years, and then it will be reviewed. And with that moratorium, I know there were a lot of people upset in the town about how the government just came in and decided there couldn't be oil and gas alone, because people there are quite pro oil and gas since it brings in a lot of money. And the Nunavut Regional Corporation actually issued a statement against the moratorium. But that being said, I think the kind of politics of this moratorium, I think there was a lot of political gain to be made by Obama and Trudeau in putting forth this moratorium. But to be fair, the price of oil is so low that there wouldn't really have been major oil and gas or infrastructure development in the next 5 years anyway. So it was kind of an easy decision by more liberal governments to kind of issue this. So I don't think it will have a huge effect. I don't think much would have happened infrastructurally in the absence of the moratorium. So.
Thank you for answering that, which goes already a little broader policy framework, which is, of course, then influencing what happens locally. I also found it interesting when you mentioned this is actually a local road, but the implications or it fits into this much bigger plan, and how this actually is something that affects and relates mostly to local population is then also decided very far away and by people who are actually not ever going to drive maybe on that road. Very interesting point to mention that. So I think we have answered all the questions from the participants. However, you can still ask a question if you have one, either right now in the remaining time or later just emailing either to coordinator@arcticsummercollege.org or also by posting it in our Facebook group if you use Facebook. And I think Brendan wanted to also.
Well, Andreas brought it up, and it is a really good point. Another way for the conversation to continue, for us to continue networking with each other as well, is to use that Facebook group. And a great way to start that is if everybody who does use Facebook would go in and write a brief introduction of themselves, maybe a couple of paragraphs, specifying what kind of what interests you have specific to the Arctic, how it fits into your career or academic ambitions and goals, and also what your background is a little bit. I know it's kind of fun. We have 2 people from Italy in the group who are in very different locations right now, but I think we have a lot of opportunities for this networking and to get to know what brought us all here. And so the Facebook group would be a good opportunity to extend that conversation and kind of build on the networking potential of the Arctic Summer College.
And just so you know, the Facebook group, it's a closed group, so everything you share in there doesn't leave the closed group. There are not only you and the people from the team on that group, but there's also all the people from previous years on the Arctic Summer College on it. So you have a little bit of a bigger group, but it's not the open public, and it's all people who have been or are affiliated with the Arctic Summer College. Just so you know who you're posting to if you're worried.
Right, but that also lets you know that you're not just networking with each other through the Facebook group, but really expanding this community of Arctic professionals and academics and researchers. And that's what's really exciting about the college, is that we've been able to, over a period of years now, really build a strong community.
Excellent. Good.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'll try and participate for sure.
That would be nice.
Thank you.
That would be nice. Thank you, Mia.
Thank you, Mia. And I really want to thank you for being our first speaker this year and for doing such a phenomenal job. And of course, I look forward to being in touch. Feel free to also engage with us whenever you think it's good for your research, when we can maybe provide some input or some connections. And of course, feel free to also join sessions whenever you're interested in. You can see the topics online. Let me know and I'll add you to the group. With that, we have one more participant who arrived a little bit after our introductory session, but I want to ask Pauline, nevertheless, to say briefly hello to the group. We won't do the full round again, but Pauline, if you can maybe introduce yourself very, very briefly to the group, and welcome to the Arctic Summer College. Well, your microphone is unmuted, but if you can't do this today now, we can also do that in the next session. Don't worry about it. So And do we have a last question? Oh yeah, your microphone doesn't work. Well, great or not great, but that's resolved then. So if next week, if it works, great, then you can chime in then. Otherwise, as you've seen already, don't worry, if your microphone doesn't work, the world doesn't end. You can send questions in the question pane or in the chat panel to us, and then we'll definitely respond to these as well. Yeah. Just before we're closing, I wanted to very briefly restate what's happening next week. So we have 2 speakers on 2 different topics, and that means each session within the 2-hour frame will be 1 hour. And the first one will be Emily McKinsey from WWF talking about Arctic natural capital analysis to inform investment decisions. So it links a little bit to the question about the cost benefit of the road, for example, but it will be, of course, not relating to that particular road project. The second presentation will be by Niels Andreasen from the Institute of the North, talking about Alaska, Arctic, and sustainable development. So it will be more an Alaskan perspective compared to what we had today. So these 2 speakers will be on next week. You'll get, of course, a reminder just before the session. And yeah, and I hope you can all join next week.
Maybe I should mention as well that Max is will be traveling. So Arna will be moderating the discussion. I'll also be available and will join. Andreas, I know, is often very, very busy, but hopefully you'll also be able to call in or join us from wherever you happen to be next Wednesday.
Excellent. Yeah, and of course we hope that even more of the participants can join next week, and look forward to hearing from you also in between, both on our email, on the Facebook group, and then also anywhere else. Arna, did you want to say something for the closing of the first session?
Thank you, Max. Just reiterating what you just said, I'm looking forward to the further exchange on the Facebook group. Looking forward to the discussions to be had next week. Just from today's session, I gathered there's a lot of interested and interesting people in this group already, and I can't remember when we had such an active exchange already after the first presentation. So I think we're off to a good start, and I'm very much looking forward to continuing it next week.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you.
And I just want to throw in a reminder about the abstracts. You know, they're due in 2 weeks, so by the 19th. But please, if you have any questions, one person did already send a question. Abstracts around 250 words, but in order to kind of expand or to be as detailed as possible, if they're a little longer than that, that's fine as well. But I and Arna and Max will be really happy to work with you on them. But so if you have questions, you can start to send them already, so we can make sure we have the best possible submission by the 19th for you.
Excellent. Yeah, and of course to maximize your chances of going on to that trip as well, beyond the pure research interests, which should be motivation also. So thank you all for joining today. It's been a pleasure. It was a great first session. As mentioned, I won't be on next time, but then later on. And yeah, wherever you are, so I'm not saying have a great evening, have a great rest of your day or rest of your morning, depending on the time zone. Enjoy the beginning of summer, and let's be in touch soon. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.